Well, thank you very much to the organisers for inviting me. I feel tremendously privileged. I've only been in the country and director of the IFR now for just over 3 weeks, so it's a great opportunity to meet people active in the field. I'm very interested to come back to the UK. I've worked for the last few years in Australia, and my wife is very interested to know what's drawn me back here, because she obviously has to come back with me. Well, perhaps not so obviously. And it's really about the excitement I feel about the work that's going on at the moment. And my title here is about the interdisciplinary approach that looks at these complex biological problems. And in a sense, it's summed up with the next slide, which I've shamelessly ripped off from you, which actually highlights here. And this is the organ we're all very interested in now, not so much for its own sake, but for what it harbours, and that's the microbiome. I remember feeling, I don't know if you can cast your mind back to 2000. Year 2000, there's a great deal of excitement because we've done the human genome, and this was going to unravel a whole roadmap of all the genes important in disease. Now, fast forward 15 years later, and we're interested in this vast community of microorganisms we're all carrying around with us, not only in our gut, but in our skin. Now remember, there are 10 times more organisms here than there are of you cells that you're carrying, and the complexity of the biosynthetic pathways that they carry is again an order of magnitude more. So there's much more potential for cell signaling going on in here, and metabolite formation. The complexity in here really is enormous, and I think this is going to make a great contribution to the way we understand health and disease and homeostasis and complexity. So much so now that I no longer think about good bacteria and bad bacteria. I just think about bacteria now living in a community and, in a sense, signalling. And that's very important, and this is the great pull that's drawn me away from the surf and the sun and the wine back to the UK to work at the IFR, which I think offers a potential to do some exciting work going forward. The next few slides explain the background of that and what the excitement I feel. I hope I can convey some of that to you, and I know you're working with guys at IFR, and I think it's a tremendous opportunity to put this all into context. So that your research questions are very much that underpin some of my research questions here, and that is, do alterations in what's happening in intestinal barrier have an effect on ME? And what are the consequences downstream of that, in this case for immune signaling? If you actually cast a broader net now, this is not only relevant to ME, but a whole variety of disorders well outside of the scope that we used to think of having a microbial component or influence. And I'm talking now about diabetes, cancer, and other neurological disorders. So I don't want to get too carried away with this at this stage, because we need to do the work, of course. We're all good scientists. We're all rigorous scientists. We want to put this in context. But I think this offers a fantastic potential to answer, at least inform on some important questions around the role of the microbiome, the role of the gut in disease and health. So, the reality of it is we have a fantastic setup in Norwich. Here's the existing play, and I think many of you are familiar with this, probably actually more familiar than I am. I'm only just beginning to walk around now and get my bearings here. But it's a combination of unique principles, I think, that I'll declare something now. I used to work in Big Pharma, so I've got a pretty jaded past. I've worked in Big Pharma, I've worked as an academic, and I've worked in academic spin-out companies. And that makes me appreciate this interdisciplinary nature of research, because that's the core of what happens very often in Big Pharma. So we've got a hospital, we've got a university, and we've got research institutes. And the way to make that work very well is, of course, to have very good communication and to have that part of an interdisciplinary model where research can be shared and collaborations can occur. So I did not know this when I was in Australia, but Norwich, the Norwich Research Park, a lot of it's underpinned by BBSRC funding, the Research Council, but it has thousands of scientists. And if you look at it, it actually is a real international hub, and it has more highly cited scientists outside of London, Oxford and Cambridge. So it's a fantastic hub of really top-class scientists, all concentrated together in a very nice research park environment. So IFR is actually the only publicly funded UK institute that addresses this fundamental issue of food and health. And as you can see, my interest in this is the way that interplays through from the food we ate, the interaction with the microbiome in the gut, and the resulting consequences that to a number of diseases and homeostasis itself. The Institute's also interested, for those of you out there who might also have an interest, in food security, diet, healthy ageing, and food waste. And as I say, this is underpinned by Research Council funding. And I'm really interested in this concept of the parts working cooperative together in an interdisciplinary context. So at IFR, there's a biorepository, so we have fundamental information on microorganisms, gut biologists, genome sequencing, you've seen as an important part of what we're doing. There's also proteomics facilities. We understand pathology, the impact of diet, and the whole microbiome. So the output of that here should be some greater understanding of seeing what this vast degree of complexity in the microbiome has as a consequence on disease, health, homeostasis. Now, the really exciting part is this, that there's going to be considerable investment into a new Institute for Food and Health that brings together some of those components from the university, the IFR itself, and the hospital into a single building. And I think this really does represent a tremendous opportunity, not just for the UK, but for Europe and the rest of the world, to have a really site of excellence for research into this fundamental area. There's a number of other institutes around and on site that form this greater part, but the hub of this should be an institute that focuses from basic research, has a translational component in as much as people from the hospitals will actually be working in here, alongside university component. And as I say, this interdisciplinary model, I think, represents the way ahead for the way research can function at a very high level in the UK. This really illustrates that point I love Venn diagrams. I think they illustrate things very nicely. So we have the hospital, the IFR, the UEA, the hospital itself, bringing together a mass of individuals and research, technology, support, good ideas that can focus on this really important idea that I hope I've conveyed to you about the importance of what the microorganisms are doing in disease and health. So, just a cartoon to show how that will actually be. At the minute, this is an aerial view showing the medical research buildings, new buildings that have gone up to house some bioincubators and other communication hubs. Here's the John Innes Centre, which is famous for its plant research. Here's TGAC, TGAC, which is the Genome Centre. And this is where we're going to be, new Centre for Food and Health, neatly positioned close to all the action. And the building is going to be completed, I think, in 2017. I should say I've been involved in a number of buildings of new laboratories over the last 30 years. And I'm optimistic that this looks like it's well planned, well designed, and will have all the facilities we need in place. So it offers a new approach, I think, to doing science. And we've heard this word before, holistic, and I think that's quite important. We all tend to be, as scientists, driven by reductionism, breaking large arguments down into smaller and smaller parts so we can get to a larger understanding. We've now moved on to an era more systems-driven. Biology has become more quantitative in the way we understand the effects, and we want to move to a more holistic way where we can merge those large data sets together into a greater understanding. So we want to drive basic research to applied research. We need the connections with patients, with hospitals, with basic research. It all needs to come together in this interdisciplinary way, linking genome sequencing, gut microbiologists, people who work on microbes themselves and understand their genes and their genetics. We want to have clear outputs on that, not only on terms of patient health, but the way we can influence government policy. And we want to become, it's one of our targets obviously, the site where this work is carried out both nationally and internationally. And it will certainly increase the world-class reputation that Norwich already has. We're going to play a pivotal role, I think, in this space in terms of that industry, NHS, research collaboration, This will give us freer and easier access to patient cohorts, delivering on new treatments, looking the way we can increase funding and leverage for more funding, because research, as you all know, is a very expensive process, and actually look to bring those together in a coherent space. At the moment, this has some gaps, you see here in the boxes, and it's just a mood map or thought process about looking, and I hope to fill some of these in as the ideas develop, but we're looking how bacteria work, how the pathogens come from, where they go. In the past, I've operated, you might know this phrase, under a One Health model. Now, the One Health model means that the organisms, and again, this is focused on the microbiome, the organisms that live in the soil, the organisms that live in the environment around us, the organisms that live in our food organisms, in our food animals, food production animals, in our pets, and their impact on the organisms that live on us are all complexly related in some fashion. How can we manipulate those organisms for a better outcome for health? We want to produce new foods that impact on health. And we want to actually perhaps drive this argument even further so that we can describe personalised nutrition schemes that actually are most beneficial for your microbiome and your health. So, the challenge for the future in context of ME. ME has a huge cost, a huge impact. You know much more about this than I do. But the opportunity, I think, as far as New Centre for Food and Health is that we're going to be in an excellent position going forward over the next few years, at least to try and understand some of the basic science that underpins that and to have outputs that might affect everyone. So, this is just a slide that summary. By way of summary, this just summarises the partners already that Simon has, who I think you all know worked on this, right across the board from IFR itself to Cornell, TGAC, NHS, Invest in ME, of course, Pirbright, UEA, UCL, and University of Oxford. So thank you for listening to me. I hope that was just a rapid tour around what we're doing in Norwich. And I hope you share the excitement that I do about the new opportunity. Thank you.
Well, there's a chance there to ask questions and, of course, to put some ideas forward.
Now,
yes.
Remember, I've only been there for 3 weeks.
That's
please.
long enough in politics. Sir, yes, and then the gentleman here, yes.
Hello, hi. Fantastic what you're proposing here. The developments at Norwich look great. You are inevitably in the future going to butt heads with some pretty powerful vested interests. And much like the research which exposed the dangers of smoking, you're going to be exposing the dangers of eating. So you obviously are aware of that. How are you going to approach that?
Well, I think we've talked about complexity in arguments. We talked about big data and how do we convince psychiatrists of some of the disorders. I think each of these issues has to be handled on their merits. I don't have a crystal ball to see what the future might hold with this, but you're absolutely right. But I think we must go into this with our eyes open. There will be situations, and of course there will be vested interests that want to represent food that might turn out to be unhealthy. But you know, industry has a great way of surviving. It's very Darwinian also. And if it sees that it's not producing what the public wants or the public needs, it might want to change it. I'm not saying that's the case. You're right, there are always going to be vested interests, there are always going to be issues, but I think we need to be prepared for those questions. I don't know how to handle that at the moment.
There is experience around on GM foods, of course, through the John Innes, and also the whole business of climate gate, as they called it in the American Senate. You know, the climate change and all the work that had been done really went kind of fut, you know, just by a few people tweeting into people's emails, scientists' emails. So there's a bit of experience what you should do and what to look out for. You can never sometimes see things coming, but sometimes with experience around, you can pick up things. You've always got to be ready for the mail on Sunday to come at you.
Might I suggest that you need powerful political friends early on?
Oh, well, let's get some.
Yes, sir. Here, yes.
Thank you very much for those great perspectives. Having come from great pharma, big pharma, my question follows on Monsanto and Roundup and glyphosate. Traces in our food, how are they affecting our microbiome?
Okay, one of the great things I think about this area of research is it's just starting. We don't know. We simply don't know. And I think that's a fair and honest position that any scientist can have. It's a fair and honest position that any scientist can have that makes it clear we don't know, but we are prepared, I think, to have a look at that sort of... I think these are questions we can research. It depends if you get the funding. I don't know... now, Roundup works through the ESP... I'm trying to remember, ESP synthase, the ARO-A pathway. Yeah. I don't know what effect that's likely to have, but then again, no one probably does.
It will select in a negative way.
We don't know. We don't know.
Yes, that needs research.
But we do know that
Malcolm.
glyphosate was patented as an antimicrobial. And if you put that in the gut, what's going to happen to the microbes in the gut? We don't know. But we do know it's in our food. It's in bread. It's in our bread already. And this, I think, is very concerning and very worrying. And if we look at the data we've got carefully, we should begin to find some of our answers and some of the grounds for our response. Because I don't want to buy bread that's got glyphosate in it. I just don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Now, they say the amount's too small, but if you take it in day by day by day, on a continuous dosage, then we don't know what the answer to that is. And things like endocrine disruptors, which operate at about 10 to the minus 15, 10 to the minus 18, they're even worse. And all this stuff is in the environment. There's a big sorting out to be done with the chemicals in our environment, which have never been evaluated for their biological activity. And in our food.
Yeah. What we do know, though, is all of us at some time, and me today especially, I'm taking antibiotics today already. I've got some infection. Yeah. I'm on antibiotics. That's going to have a massive effect on my microbiome. I can tell you this morning it was pretty unpleasant, but I don't want to go into any more details on that. But you're right, antibacterials have profound effects on your gut microbiome. And we don't really know enough about that yet either. So, again, I'm challenged by the opportunity here to find out more. And I think that's a great starting position that we should all take.
Margaret, I can see you. Margaret's in the House of Lords. We know each other from work in the past. She's been very keen on advocating the problems with organophosphates, and we're involved with airliners and the effects on pilots and passengers on airliners when the heating in the airliners comes from the jet engines, and it's assumed that organophosphates might come from it. But again, the court cases at the minute don't accept the science particularly, although there's a big attempt to... Pardon?
One coroner has done that.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, but you say something, Margaret, please.
Hello, Margaret. We met last night.
Yes, we did. I'm aware that there's been quite a lot of work done in the States by SNF and colleagues on the correlation between the gut microbes and glyphosate. I know that correlation isn't causation, but it's very clear that there is something there that is a cause for concern. And I asked questions about the onset of juvenile Crohn's disease in this country, for example, over the last 10 years, and it has gone up astronomically. And there's really no other reason for it doing so, but for effects on the gut microbes. I'm not saying necessarily that it's just glyphosate, but it's the toxins that we take in.
This cuts to the core, I think, of what we need to do as scientists, as responsible scientists. That need to be clearly understood, the difference between correlation and causation. And so we always need to bear that in mind when we're answering. Particularly, we look at biology. There is vast complexity. And we need to be very certain when we're making statements that we know the facts. And we need to be particularly sensitive to the distinction between correlates and causates whenever we do that. You know that.
I'm only too well aware of that, yes. I'm a member of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Food and Health. Would you come and address us?
I'd be delighted to.
I'll see you get an invitation.
You old devil, Margaret.
She's a seasoned campaigner. She sneaked that in at the end. There was no way I could say no.
Good, absolutely. Any other question before we have a break for coffee? You can see that it's opening up. The door is open. Lots of questions can now be asked, and the research can follow in after it. And maybe at last, Britain will be at the front of some of this research. Let's hope so. It looks like it. Thank you.